Hi, I'm John Fogarty. I'm the Diocesan Treasurer, and today I'd like to provide you with an overview of our financial results from 2019 to the present and take a look at our preliminary budget for 2025. So first, a few key messages. Our net assets as of the end of October of this year were $26.2 million. That's an increase of $6 million from 2019. In this year, we expect that our revenues will exceed our expenses by about $300,000. And therefore, we will be able to transfer those funds into our diocesan fund. The diocesan fund is the accumulation of unrestricted excess of revenue over expenses over all time. And so some years we add to that fund and some years we subtract from it, as we have talked about in past years. In 2025, we expect our budget to be much the same as 2024. However, on an ongoing, most years in the past few years, we have continued to spend more than our ordinary revenue. Now, what do I mean by ordinary revenue? That I use that term to describe one, your contributions, two, our investment distributions of 5%, and then a very small amount of program fees. This is our ordinary ongoing revenue. We are in sound financial condition, but over time we need to better balance our ordinary revenue with our expenses. And toward that, we're seeking input to help us find the way forward. And I'll talk more about that at the end of the presentation. So let's talk about net assets. What are they? Well, net assets are the difference between total assets and total liabilities. And fortunately, in our case, we have almost no liabilities. So we're really pretty much talking about assets. As of October 31st, we had $26.4 million of total assets. Of that, 21.8 was our investment portfolio, our endowment, and then 3.8 million was made up of property, buildings, etc. The rest was cash and other miscellaneous assets. Now, net assets are divided broadly into two categories. There are unrestricted net assets, and then there are designated and restricted net assets. Designated net assets are those things that our executive board have designated and given parameters for what they can be used for. Restricted net assets, however, are restricted by their donor, and those cannot be used for any purpose other than what the donor permitted. And I'll share a little more about how that affects us in a few minutes. But as you can see, our unrestricted and our designated and restricted net assets are almost the same, adding up to about $26 million. So let's talk about the investment portfolio. The investment portfolio is invested in our Diocesan Foundation Fund. It, in turn, is managed by the Bank of America Private Bank. And the fund manager that we've used, it has been with us probably for 25 years. So this is a very long-term relationship. It's been an excellent one. The Diocesan Foundation is a separate organization from the diocese. It has its own board of trustees, most of whom are involved in finance or investments in some way, and they do oversee and are responsible for this fund. The Bank of America maintains a very well diversified portfolio, and it consists of very high quality assets. As you can see, about 70% are in equities, 20 in fixed income, and 10 in private equity or other assets. This is a pretty typical sort of breakdown that you see in endowments. Over the past 10 years, from September of 2024 back to 2014, the annual rate of return has been about 7.8%, as you see here. Very good performance. So let's talk a little bit about the transactions in the portfolio. You can see here at the beginning of 2019, we had about $13.2 million. That grew to the end of the year about 15, and you can see year by year, with the exception of 2022, which was a horrendously bad year in the financial markets, it's grown every year. Additions, you see here, these are funds that were transferred into the portfolio. Some of those relate to property sales, particularly some of the larger ones. And then disbursements means these are the 5% draw plus any other amounts that we have drawn out of the portfolio. Now that middle column that says earnings, realized and unrealized gains and loss, net of expenses, that's the investment performance. And you can see, with the exception of 2022, which kind of wiped out the gains of 21, there's been substantial growth in accordance with the same growth in the financial markets. So let's look a little further here at distributions. Over these years, the normal distributions, that is the 5% distributions you see here, have been $3.4 million. We've also had some extra distributions. In one year, we did return some funds, you see in 2020, but we've drawn out about $730,000 in extra distributions over 5 years, for a total of $4.1 million in distributions, at the same time that the portfolio has grown substantially. So what funded part of that were sales of property. You can see here the years and the funds raised. These were properties that were given back to us when churches closed, and you can see it's about $2.6 million. Church properties only come to the diocese when a vestry has decided the property is no longer needed by their parish. At that point, the title is given to the diocese. The diocese then evaluates what the best use of that property would be in accordance with the goals of the diocese. In some cases, this may be to allow another denomination to use the property, or it could be used for some other civic purpose. But in some cases, it's best simply to monetize the property and redirect that resource to other needs. All of the properties that have been sold in the last few years have been held by the diocese for a number of years. Now, this year we sold, just a few days ago, we sold some land that we had owned for quite a number of years, and that brought in about $600,000. So if you add that, we'd have about $3.4 million in proceeds. So just to sum up, talking about assets, the endowment has increased by $6.8 million over 5 years. About 2.6 of that was due to property sales. Investment gains and net of expenses about 7.3, which is an increase of about 57% over the 5 years. Now, this last point is something I really want to key on. The average inflation rate over those 5 years in total, not each year, but in total, was 20%. And so if we take the portfolio at the end of 2023 and we restate it in 2019 dollars, equivalent dollars, it would be $16.4 million, as opposed to, I think it was about 15.1 at the end of 2019. So what that tells us is that we have more than kept even with inflation, and that's very important that we maintain that, to maintain the purchasing power of our endowment. So let's look at revenues and expenses over 5 years. You can see here at the top our contributions, that's primarily from you, our investment draw, and our expenses have all been essentially flat. You can see here from 2019 to 2023, it's not even a $100,000 increase in expenses. Now, what's really interesting is when we restate this in constant dollars as of 2019. And what we find then is that contributions, investment draw, and expenses have all declined pretty much in line over those 5 years when they're stated in constant dollars. And what that says to me is, since we pretty much do the same things every year, that we must be doing them more financially efficiently. And that's in keeping with the fact that our contributions have also declined in real terms, and you can see they've been basically flat in nominal terms. Really important that we consider the effect of inflation. So how do we think we'll end up 24? Well, this 3.15 million of revenue contains about a $600,000 gain from selling the land I mentioned earlier. And that allows us to have over a $300,000 transfer to the diocesan fund for a net of zero. For 2025, our preliminary look says about $2.6 million in revenue, which does not include any asset sales, about 2.9 of expenses, and a transfer from the diocesan fund of about 360,000, which is essentially covered by the gain from this year. The 2025 preliminary budget has been recommended by the Program Budget and Review Committee, but it has not been reviewed or approved by the Executive Committee. They will take that action in their January meeting. So this presentation gives everyone an opportunity to consider the budget and provide feedback to the Executive Committee. So let's look a little more detail at the budget for 2025. So let's take a look at the sources of our revenue. As has been true for a number of years, about half of our revenue comes from contributions from you, our parishes. A little over a quarter comes from our 5% distributions from our endowment, and a very small amount from the fees for our programs. The funds released from restrictions, important to understand that donors have restricted that money. Whatever is released from restriction, the 5%, is then expended. So we don't control that amount, and therefore it doesn't contribute to any surplus or deficit. The last wedge of the pie is the transfer from the diocesan fund, and this year we expect that to contribute about 12% of our budgeted revenue. We're going to take a look at expenses in a couple of different cuts. The first one is in alignment with Bishop Susan's initiatives, and you see here congregational development, rule of life, etc. About 43% of the 25 budget will be going to congregational development, and that's consisting of the bishop herself, her supporting staff, the canon to the ordinary, governance, as well as parish life. Rule of life is Christian formation, the youth and college ministries, and worship support as well as outreach. And evangelism is communications, the wider church, and support of Chenko. Creation care is principally our utilities, rent, maintenance of buildings, and so forth. And beloved community, I think, speaks for itself. Now, we'll also take a look at expenses in a little bit different way that I call core expenses. So, about half of our expenses are salaries and benefits. And if we remove that and just think about what's left, well, this tells you what's left. The other half is spent, as you see here, youth and college ministries, which includes Chenko in this cut, is about 11%. The wider church, which is primarily the gift to the national church, is about 10%. Our office utilities, maintaining all of our properties, about 7%. And you can see the other slices there. So what this tells us is a tremendous proportion of our expenses are salaries and benefits, which is not anything unusual. So where do we go from here? Well, first, overarching this conversation, we're in sound financial condition, but over a period of time, we need to do a better job of bringing our revenues and expenses into balance. And to do that, we need to carefully look at what we're trying to accomplish. For the last several years, our budgets have been based on what we've done previously. And that implies that our goals really have not changed over that time. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with what we've been doing. But every so often, we really need to sit back and say, what are our goals? How are we going about accomplishing them? Are we doing things that we really don't feel that we need to do or that they're needed any further? And so once we've established what goals we really want to achieve, then we can decide what resources are needed, and this will define the amount of revenue stream that we need for the future. And if that revenue stream's not attainable, we don't feel that it can be attained, then we have to reconsider the goals and how we go about achieving them. So to do that, we started a listening campaign, first with the deans of the convocations this year, to understand the needs, expectations, and whatnot, views of the parishes of their diocese. And we expect to expand that now in 2025, beginning with this presentation and getting your feedback on those points. Fortunately, our financial position allows us to do this in a careful, considered way, and we're not in a crisis where we have to make immediate and drastic changes. So we look forward to your feedback, and I'm giving you here our contact information, but feel free to discuss this amongst your fellow parishioners, fellow clergy, and we look forward to conversations over the next few months. Thank you for listening.